Hello and welcome to Audio Gyan.
Today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Anirudha Joshi. Anirudha is a professor at Industrial Design Center, IIT Mumbai. He works in the field of design and teaches human-computer interaction and related topics in IIT Mumbai and other academic institutions all over India. He is one of the first teachers to introduce usability and ethnographic user studies. Anirudha did his BTech in Electrical Engineering from IIT Mumbai, followed by his Masters in Design from IDC, specializing in the field of visual communication. It's a great honor to have you. Thanks, Anirudha, for being on the show.
Sure, most welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, today's discussion will be around epistemology of design in India, right? So, being a designer myself, I have clearly seen there's a big gap between the syllabus which is taught in design schools or any other academic institutions and what is actually required from a like when you become a professional designer. Yeah, so what's your perspective on this? I mean, do you think, first, do you agree that there's this gap? And if yes, then why do you think it exists?
Yeah, so sure. Gaps do exist. I totally agree that there are gaps between what we teach in universities and design schools and what a professional designer needs to do. And I would say that there are three kinds of gaps. Okay. So the first kind of gaps I would say are the unintentional gaps. Things that sort of get left out in the curriculum, things that, nobody covers but could have been covered but sort of were just not done, basically. Okay. And there can be quite a few of those things because there is like just a large number of things that people need to learn to become good designers. And so you cannot really cover everything in a course curriculum. Okay. And so generally I have said this in the past that it takes between 5 to 7 years to make a designer. Okay. And in our design school for the master's program, it's just a 2 years program. For the undergraduate program also, it's a 4-year program. But these are very formative programs and they really start taking design seriously only in their 3rd year onwards. So it takes about 5 to 7 years. So necessarily some of these have to be spent in the industry and many things that get left out. The second kind of gap I would say, or the second reason for the gap is because certain things are best learned in the industry. They are not actually best learned. I mean, if you attempted to teach those kind of things in an academic setup, it will not be a very fruitful exercise. So those are the kind of things that are easily and very quickly learned in the industry. They are, part of your work initial few years of your work and those are best left for the industry. And in fact, the people in the academia after a few years will kind of lose touch. So a lot of people in the design academia do come with some industry background, and so however after a few years they kind of lose touch with those qualities, and so they are not really very well equipped to teach those kind of things. So I think those are also okay. I mean, I would leave them out and say that, okay, these are best learned from while you are in the industry, the first few years of your experience. But there is a third kind of a gap that actually I would call as the intentional gaps, or things that we do which are sort of intentionally different from what the industry does in the academia. So if you see some of the better design schools all over the world, they will not necessarily prepare people only for the industry, or I would say only for the immediate applications in the industry. So, certainly we in IDC and I personally believe that actually design education is education rather than training. It's not design training in the sense that the objective is not to prepare people with a certain set of skills, but to develop people into better individuals, better thinking individuals, thought leaders of the future, able to think separately, think differently, think ambiguously. You can have many kinds of what we can call as the higher order thinking skills that you might want to develop, which are relevant for design. And if you see some of the best design schools in the world, don't prepare people so that they can immediately in the first or second month after joining a company start being productive. That is not the objective. In fact, you'll see some of the design leaders who have come from these best design schools. They are relevant and they are providing thought leadership and design leadership even 15, 20, 30 years after they finish their design education. And having that kind of so while you are focusing on that kind of an outlook, even if you don't focus on something sort of more immediate intentionally, that I think is fairly intentionally. They do it deliberately in the sense that you break away from something that you might do in the industry immediately.
So you're saying that these curriculum or these courses are crafted in such a way that there is room for students to explore in the later part of their career. So you're saying that's what you meant by intentional?
Yes. So do things that are not necessarily immediately. I mean, if you see my most curriculums, they are not necessarily that, I would say about 50-60% of a curriculum, and I'm only now talking about my curriculum, was our curriculum in IDC that I'm familiar with the most. 50-60% of our curriculum is perhaps not having an immediate direct application when the student goes and joins the industry. But it helps in developing the person, developing an individual as a good designer. So if you look at even the starting with the fundamentals in the first year, first semester, first few months, just going to the workshop and learning to make a perfect cube, or going every day early in the morning and attending sketching classes, or so it develops certain disciplines, certain rituals, certain skills, certain abilities, an eye for the detail, and so on. So these are the kind of things that are not necessarily. Nobody probably will need to make a cube when they join the industry, but it is something that develops you as a person.
So I guess it's mainly to make students sensitive about design at a bigger on a bigger canvas, and also
it develops certain sensitivities. It develops an attention to detail. It makes you sit down for several hours continuously, paying attention to the minute variation that is happening in your model or in your drawing. So it just develops a certain set of skills, certain disciplines, and I think they are very important in the longer run. Or you might be doing a course in research methods. Now, there may be hardly anybody in the industry, in the area of design, who might need, maybe very few people, I would say 10% of the people perhaps might need research methods to be applied in their work. But because you are equipped with that, it gives you a certain power, it gives you a certain outlook, it gives you a certain strength, which you would otherwise miss out on and shy away from if the opportunity arises. So there are certain gaps which, of course, need to be ready. And now I'm kind of taking a slightly wider perspective at a national level. If you look at design schools, there are many new design schools coming up in India. We've kind of had now, I think, 30 or 35 design schools in the last 10, 15 years that have opened up, which is a fabulous thing. This is something that we've been sort of looking for, waiting for to happen. However, because there are now so many new schools, there are not enough people who have design teaching experience. So there are a certain bunch of gaps that are coming because of that. So, and that will, this is always a chicken and egg story. Unless there are opportunities for hiring design teachers, which is new design schools, why would somebody want to develop themselves into good design teachers? They wouldn't. So I think it's a matter of time when we will get people who are better and better. And I think it behoves upon us to give opportunities for new design teachers to develop at a national level. So some of these things are sort of more woes of the expanding design education field.
That's very interesting. So any other perspective or your thoughts on reducing these intentional gaps?
I think what I have not mentioned so far is design research is a very important attraction for a design academic. Okay, and I think the importance of this has increased over the last few years, but it is still new enough and not sufficiently understood, particularly not sufficiently understood, I would say, in the industry, the importance of this. And because we haven't had a very strong tradition in design research, over the last, I think you would say much of it has started in the last 10 or 11 years. And it will probably increase in importance in the next 10 or 11 years. And the effects of it we will start seeing. So, but having conferences, for example, research conferences, So we actually don't have, I would say, how many conferences do we have in India which can be considered to be research conferences? So I would say maybe 3. There is Typo Day, there is India HCI, and there is ICOD. Other than that, we don't really have very strong design-led research conferences. So developing research conferences where people can meet, exchange ideas, develop areas of work, and so on. I think so that is something that is beginning to happen also incidentally over the last 10 years. All these conferences are also within the last 10 years. So that is one big area that is developing. The other big area that is developing is the number of PhDs. I think it's related. The number of PhDs that we are getting out of people from design schools is also increasing. So these two things, I think, will help in developing design education and design educators in a substantial way, in a significant way. We also used to have a fairly strong, so basically if you see how the design education was set up in India, the first generation design teachers sort of developed in a situation where there was almost virtually no industry. Okay? So it was in that sense relatively easy to attract good talent into design teaching. I would say the last 20 years or so, we've had very strong growth in the industrial areas. In the IT industry, manufacturing industry has grown, automobile. So many sectors have grown, and fortunately they have started hiring designers. As a result, though, the education sector has become something that people don't think of as a career in the beginning. So not many good designers managed to attract back. So like for example, I passed out in 1992. I worked in the industry for about 6 years or 7 years. And I said, okay, I want to teach some of these things to students. So I joined back as a faculty member in 1998, late 1998 in IDC. So there are a few other people from my age group who have done that. Okay, but in the next generation, I would say 10 years down the line, we haven't had that many people from very good design schools, great designers, who have really gone back to the industry, gone back to academics. Okay, then I would say in the next 10 years, I would say in the last 10 years, I would say, we are actually getting a lot more traction. So many very young people are going and doing PhDs, and that they are looking at as a method of getting into academics. So, and this might sort of eventually pan out into something better. So that is one thing that we can do. There are several other things that actually have happened in other fields, but haven't happened in design. So, for example, in the technology area, the IITs have a pan-IIT alumni network, which is extremely strong. So the alumni actually give back, IIT alumni, including IIT Bombay and many of the other IITs, actually give back to a lot in many different ways to their alma maters. Of course, some of them are faculty members, but other than that, I'm saying, people who are working in the industry. So same thing has not really started, I would say, from in the context. There are networks, alumni networks, but they are mainly from a job perspective or maybe discussions about design and so on. But they really haven't contributed back, or there haven't been the student alumni networks or mentoring, or so that networkness has not been there as strongly as it should be. So alumni is just one way, but if you kind of expand that idea, then industry professionals, good industry professionals, people who are, and the good industry professionals will be the ones who are busy. Okay, and just because they are busy, then they are not able to go and give enough time to. And we are extremely lucky that we do get some people who come and contribute and work. But I would say it is still not enough. We'll probably need a lot more of their time and a lot more people coming in and doing things. And I would say we are also at fault. I don't think that, at least in our school, I would say we haven't done enough to develop such an alumni network from our side. And we're trying to do something about that recently. So there are quite a few things that could possibly be done about reducing these gaps. But all gaps need not be reduced also. Some of the gaps are very much intentional. Okay, and in fact, sometimes what happens is, I would say right now, the most scarce, well, we have a lot of scarcities in our academic systems, okay, so I say faculty members and so on. But I think maybe, in IDC, we are actually right now jam-packed for space. We have gone from 60 students to 300 students within a matter of 7 years, and we haven't really added a lot of space in our building. So that made a lot of scarcity. I mean, equipment, money, that's always, people always complain about it. But I think the biggest scarcity is the time of students. So most of our programs are extremely compressed. So the question is, when you add something, what is it that you should be taking out? And that is the question that always arises. And that is why I said that there is quite a few things that we intentionally cover which are not sort of relevant for the industry. And if you add more and more things which are relevant for the industry, what we will have to take out from is those things eventually.
So when do you think this gap will be balanced out? I mean, given design, assuming design to be in a very adolescent stage in comparison with other disciplines of studies, what is your assumption, or when do you see this gap getting reduced where the demand and the supply of good designers is balanced out?
So so if you look at the scale of the country, 1.25 billion, 1.3 billion population country, our industry has been continuously growing for the last 20, 30 years at the rate of 7, 8, 10, 12, 14%. For a country of this size, in terms of population as well as industry, we need a large number. I would, if I have to take a guess, something like 10 million designers is something that we probably need. At least 5 million designers is something that we would be looking for. We are probably right now, in terms of numbers, somewhere around maybe 20,000 designers.
That's a massive
as a country. Okay, I don't know how you count a designer, but if you look at it, that's the huge gap basically that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, we are not even 2% there, I would say. Okay, or 1% there. So we have a huge gap in terms of, and as a result, many things have happened actually. One of the things that has happened is that design has become inaccessible to people who need design. And let me give an example. I mean, if you have a small NGO doing something, and they need design, but they cannot afford design because designers' salaries are just way too high. So we have very few people, and there are quite a lot of demand on their time, and obviously then they will try to optimize on that and try to each person will individually try to make the most of the benefits that they are getting in life, which is fine. However, there will be, so what this has done right now is made design inaccessible. So we rarely will find jobless designers. Okay, I mean, unless somebody is really very bad or something unfortunate has happened, you'll really not find typically a person who is really looking for a job and is not finding a job for 6 months or 1 year or something like that. So which is, as a designer, we might think, oh, that is great. But the reason for that is because there's just so much pent-up demand that many sections of society don't think about hiring designers. Okay, so if you look at small scale, if you look at the manufacturing industry, the small scale industry just will not think about hiring designers. If you think about the print industry, the small publication houses, they will think design is a resource which is sort of way beyond their capacity.
But maybe because they are not sensitive enough to the design concept as such, or are not exposed to that environment, right?
So, well, that's what we think as designers, but I think that is really not the case. I mean, in the sense that, one of the things is they have not been exposed sufficiently to design, and that is possible. But they don't, I mean, how exposed are we to doctors? We're really not exposed to doctors or medicine, I would think. I don't need to be sensitive to medicine. I don't have to be a professional patient. Similarly, I don't have to be I think it's just, people will just not think about hiring designers unless they are really large companies or extremely deep pocket activities. I mean, if you think about it, if you say, I'm wearing a designer shirt, I would automatically assume that it's an expensive shirt, which is not a great thing for design. I think, that designer earns a lot of money, but it is not such a great thing because then there is not enough competition. Designers get complacent, it's okay. Then, so it's a kind of a slippery slope from there. So being competitive is very important, and we have to be actually. I always tell my students that we should be sensitive to the fact that we get hired very easily and so on. And it's nothing to do with us. It's to do with the fact that right now there is just tremendous demand and there is very little supply, and that is where we stand right now. And and you have to think both sides. One we have to think is that if the job offer that I'm getting or the salary that I'm getting, if it was like 1/10, would I be still wanting to do that job? I'll only take it up basically. And on the other side, also think about the fact that how can you improve yourself in the longer run. So again, this is something that I have said to several of my students, that sometimes people feel that when they pass out of a design school, they've had enough knowledge for them to last till the time that they retire from their career. And nothing could be further from the truth. As I said in the beginning, it takes 5 to 7 years to make a designer, and you just spend 2 years or 3 years or 4 years in your career trying to become a designer. There's still some more time just to become a designer, and then you have to become a good designer, and then you have to do an exceptionally good piece of work. You have to get lucky to get the appropriate breaks at the right time, get the opportunities at the right time, and to do really some outstanding.
Sounds very complex and challenging.
Yeah. So and you have to grow continuously. So this is something that I have learned being in the field of interaction design. That what I learned maybe 10 years ago, what I'm doing today, I'm probably using only 25% of what I learned 10 years ago, and 75% of the things that I'm doing today, I learned in the last 10 years. Okay, and this has been ongoing in my career since 1992, so about 25 years that I passed out. So if you project it forward, that means you're continuously learning. And so I would ask my designer friends, where they have gone and what they have learned in the recent times. Like in the last 2 years, what new things have you learned? Have you given enough time to yourself? Because unless you do that, you don't become better as a designer. I'm not saying that go and learn something else. Learn something about what you're doing. Okay, and get better and better at it. And so because there is not enough competition, certain level of complacency might set in some people. And that could be something that is worrisome.
So slightly changing track here, and I wanted to ask you, India, obviously, as we have seen, it's a very different kind of culture. There's a lot of multiplicity. And what I have observed in my 12 years of design career, at least, is that a lot of people get inspired by the Western school of thought, the Western school of design, or maybe Oriental school of design. But is it fair, or do you think it's fair to borrow the concepts which have been built over a period of time, like say minimalism concept or the Zen design concept from the Oriental school of design? Do you think it's fair for Indians to borrow them, or because there's a very thin line between copying and just following, right? Because when you copy, you actually try to understand and then probably copy, and when you are following, it's just ripping off, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, I'm kind of again going to give two different answers to this question. So one part of the answer is yes, obviously we are a very unique culture, and in fact, I'll give this answer second. Let me give the first answer first. So the first answer is minimalism, as you say. Basically, by that I suppose you mean things like clean lines and those kind of forms, and mainly visual and those kind of issues, right? So many of these things actually come from clean lines and minimalistic forms and geometric shapes and streamlined bodies and things like that. Actually come from they are more global, I would say, than being Western or being Oriental or something like that. And they are actually, in a sense, a response to the technologies that have developed, the manufacturing processes that have developed, the way things get made. So if you go back to Karl Marx, the way things get made has an immense impact on society, and including things like form. And otherwise, you might not really see the direct link, but it is there. And the way things are developed, things are made, has a direct. So, and if you see, a lot of our form, language, and so on developed in the post-industrial area when industrialization came in. So, how can we make things? I mean, it depends on the materials that are being used, the manufacturing processes, the the post manufacturing, servicing, and so on. So, it is kind of on a broader scale. The effect of these things actually have had a very strong impact on things like minimalism and so on. And if you look at even things like print technology, I mean, till offset came along, which is about 20 years, 25, 30 years ago. I mean, print technology, our language developed in, I would say, from say 1850 to 1970. The technology that was being used was essentially letterpress and blocks and so on. So the language in print, therefore, developed in that context. Okay, and so so how things print, how things come out, how are they visible, what kind of typography, what kind of fonts do we need to develop, and so on. What kind of paper is being used, is it, and so on. So all of these technologies, basically, that's what I mean by technologies. So I don't necessarily mean only manufacturing technologies. And so that is and that has been a fairly global phenomenon. Technology has been a fairly global phenomenon. Of course, it so happens that many of these technologies have been developed in the Western world, and in the Industrial Revolution and Post-Industrial Revolution, and therefore it seems like these are all Western ideas.
Interesting.
Okay, so but many of these are, if you see, are more fundamental, and in that sense, we should remain true to form, okay, and true to process, and true to material, and so on. So brass should not pretend to be gold, and gold should not pretend to be brass. Basically, they should be true to their material, and they should be. So that being the case, we have been in that sense responding in more or less in that way. And if you see now, a lot of things are changing also. Let me if you look at film now, I mean, there is a lot of technology that has come into what a lot more things are now possible in film than they ever were. Okay, things that would have been considered embellishments and so on in film, or let's say, I mean, cricket matches. There's so much of use of augmented reality. Score is shown on the ground, and there's a tracer which goes behind the ball when somebody hits a six. So yeah, so these are all sort of, if you think this is graphic design, and this is getting affected by what technology is becoming available to you, using it in a sensitive manner to communicate better or to give more information or whatever it is. Or if you see a movie like Avatar, whatever, Lord of the Rings, amount of or Game of Thrones, I mean, amount of computer graphics that we have available, make it possible to render so many nice, very interesting things. And they are all being used. I mean, if you think about it, sometimes, it may not be necessary to show a particular scene. They're showing this Bahubali scene on TV these days. It wouldn't have been possible to make a scene like that, unless you spent a lot of money. You couldn't have made that kind of scene. When, say, Ben-Hur was made, it was made with what Star Wars people called as love and care, basically. So they created all the sets and whatever. Today, you'll probably do it in maybe a tenth of that cost, and that is why we can see a lot more people doing it. So in that sense, no, that is not minimalistic at all. It is very grand in your face.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but as you mentioned, what I read is that whatever the general trend of following a particular school of design, say for example minimalism, was due to the Industrial Revolution or lack of particular.
So actually, if you see, I mean, before this sort of all this modernism and Bauhaus and so on, if you see the historical period, so there was this arts and crafts movement in the West, which was basically the response to the industrialization that was happening in the 19th century. So the industrialization pushed in making products very mass-produced, ugly-looking, compared to what was there earlier. It was beautifully produced, but very expensive. So industrialization brought the cost down. Everybody could afford a lot more products than they could earlier, but those products were not necessarily very well crafted. So there was actually a pushback to that, And there was this arts and craft movement where there was a lot of emphasis on handcrafting and skills and so on. And with that came a lot of embellishment and decorativeness and so on. And then the modernistic sort of clean lines and minimalism and so on sort of came as a response to this arts and craft. Because in the industrialized world, I mean, by then people had lived in the industrialized world for long enough to realize that it is here with us, to stay with us. I mean, these manufacturing processes are here with us for us forever. We should be trying to create something that suits this process rather than that way of manufacturing, way of making things. So, and this came as a result or in response to that. And so it's always having that kind of a cultural baggage. But it was going back to, I mean, it was trying to become true to form. It was responding to the available technologies in the truest possible way. And that is the broader learning that we actually can take back from there. So one answer to this is that. But on the other hand, the other answer is that actually there is a lot of unique problems that, so basically if you see this globalized, so I mean, colonialism, globalization, industrial revolution, these are all sort of interconnected historical events. And they kind of created a world or based on certain assumptions. Okay? And about 60 years ago or so, those assumptions were broken down. Those assumptions were, with the Second World War, many of these colonies became independent countries at the end of the Second World War, and sort of a certain political thought kind of became widely accepted in the world. And so now the world as we live in, it is absolutely unsustainable to apply the ideas of colonialized industrial revolution. So we have to actually respond to the problems that we face in our country. And so in that sense, as designers, we need to respond to the problems that, and this is one of my other, I mean, this is related to the earlier point that I was saying. So obviously right now, industry is growing in India. A lot of industry is also trying to globalize itself. The IT industry is probably right now the most globalized, but the manufacturing industry is trying to globalize and so on. And therefore, there is a demand for a certain kind of design. And therefore, the designers are trying to, and then this is where actually so there is in fact not that much demand for developing something for the Indian market or for the Indian needs and so on. It is there, I'm not saying it's not there, but that demand is not able to right now afford a professional designer. Or maybe they can afford one professional designer, but not a team of 100 professional designers. So, because designers will become very expensive, and that is sort of so as a result, industry is not asking designers to make something for the Indian needs. Not enough. I mean, there are some people who are obviously, but not enough. Okay, and but I do believe that we need to prepare our designers to be responding to Indian needs rather than any needs. Because first of all, we are in the Indian context. There is no other need that we can visibly point students to, look, this is the problem, or look, that is the problem. Okay, that you can solve. The problems have to be, the real to be able to solve and make up. So at least from a training point of view, we have to train people on that, or from an education point of view, too. But from a broader perspective, that is what we should be doing. At least the IITs, the NIDs, the major design schools which are government supported are being supported by taxpayers' money, and that is our responsibility and role. But I would even say that even the private design schools should be doing that, because ultimately they are running on Indian money, even if it's not taxpayers' money. It is Indian parents who are paying for the school children, for their children to get educated in these design schools. And ultimately, they need to be able to solve their problems. And so, yes, so we need to train people, or we need to educate people to be able to respond to Indian problems. Okay, and even if there is no such demand from the industry.
That's very interesting. So actually, just taking this forward, I had given one small talk in one of the design conferences some time back, where I mentioned about how our Indian food thali is designed properly, or there are some things designed by default. So what I have observed here is that, let's take an example of this thali itself, like how things are placed in a particular order, and if you take a proper heat map or understand the frequency at which someone accesses a chapati with dal, so all those things are neatly laid out, and I felt that it's like nicely designed, right? So the question is, how can like designers in India or people within our country can understand or leverage these design principles which are hidden in our rituals or practices which we have been following for a lot of years.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, so there is a lot that one can, because any culture that you look at accumulates, develops knowledge first of all, then accumulates it over a period of time, and then that knowledge kind of gets ritualized in terms of practices and behaviors in a culture, and we say that this is a cultural thing to do. Okay, so typically, I mean, so fact becomes history, history becomes legend, legend becomes myth, and myth becomes culture. So it's kind of, so it's like you develop some knowledge, you say something, and then that gets accumulated gradually, and this is more likely to happen in older cultures than newer cultures. So obviously, because this culture is very old, you have a lot of that knowledge which is accumulated in the form of culture, which can certainly be used. Okay, there is a lot of also misrepresentation of knowledge, which we must, because okay, so I talked about research a little bit while earlier. So what is research? Basically, the research is the business of creating knowledge. Okay, and in older culture, and this is true for Indian culture, and I presume it is true for most older cultures, what we can consider as traditional knowledge. So the traditional knowledge was created by some paradigm that is now lost. Okay, some culture by some set of research practices. Let me say, allow me to use this word, or the research model, which is now lost. Now we are in this westernized research model where we publish paper, we do peer review, we do all these kind of things. This is or we do PhD and so on. So this is our knowledge generation process now. Whereas maybe 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, whenever these practices came about, knowledge generation processes were probably completely different. Although they are lost to us now, so we don't know how to do that anymore. And in the intervening period, so what has happened is that, and I heard a very interesting talk I saw it on the internet, where somebody was talking about one of the yoga practices. Okay, and as an introduction to that, so he gave certain scientific facts which are kind of cultural in India. So, example is, he said, in India we call geography as Google, which means basically, so yeah, and then he said that there is this largest object in the star, it is called the Gestational, which is a series of scientific facts, and then he jumped to something which slips my mind now, which was completely unscientific. So because A is very scientific and B is very scientific and C is very scientific, so D also must be very scientific. This is not acceptable to me. Okay, I accepted A is scientific and B is scientific and C is scientific. That doesn't make D scientific automatically. I will equally question D. Okay, and just because I am critical of it doesn't mean I'm dismissing it. I'm not being dismissive of it. I'm being extremely respectful of it. At the same time, I'm also saying that you must with equal rigor demonstrate or investigate why this is the case before claiming it to be scientific. If you're saying it's a purely cultural practice, I'm perfectly happy with it. But if you're saying it's a scientific practice, then so there is a fair amount of that has come into our culture also, which is something that is not so easy to disentangle ourselves from. I would say. It's part of us. This is something. So it's something very useful potentially. A lot of these things are very useful, and we should certainly use the useful bits out of it, and sort of keep aside things that are not so useful, or at least challenge them and investigate them possibly. Okay. So I'll kind of give an example from. So I would say that actually we need to. We work in the area of interaction design. My specific area is working for using interaction design for Indian needs. And within that, one area that we have done specific amount of work is in design of text input systems for Indian languages. So as you know, we have some of the lowest number of Wikipedia pages per internet user in the world. Okay, so I'm saying internet users. That means they are already on the internet, but they don't create Wikipedia pages. Okay, we have the smallest number of tweets in the world as far as languages are, language-wise per capita tweets. The number of Twitter users divided by number of Indian language tweets. I'm not counting English tweets coming out of India. Indian language tweets are very small. So if you kind of add up all of that, it basically comes that we cannot really do input in our own language. And actually, a lot has changed in the last 3 to 4 years because of smartphones. Okay, and the amount of use of text input in Indian languages on smartphones is way more than on desktop. And I'm saying use and spread. So like the number of users who use type in. I know personally many users who can type now. At least that's the users that I come in contact with in Indian languages on their smartphone, but they cannot do that on the desktop, on their desktop computers. Okay, there are quite a few people, and so we should thank smartphones for that. So we have, and there are quite a few keyboards available which you can use for Indian languages on smartphones, and we happen to have designed one of those. Okay, and one of the things that we have constantly questioned is the rationale that is used for Indian languages, in the design of Indian language keyboards versus the rationale that is being used for English. And there are a fair number of keyboards, including some of the world's leading keyboards, that have been sort of localized for Indian languages. And we have done evaluations with some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And we have found that they do actually much worse than some of the keyboards that we know does not use great technology, but they are designed using the understanding of the script. So this is where I would say that, so there are already thousands of things, and now our scripts have been very beautifully designed. And I'm not saying just the visual form of the scripts, which are also beautiful, of course, but then all scripts are beautiful in that sense. But the structure of the script. So if I ask my students to do this exercise, I ask them to place their hand on their throat and say k, 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 g, no. And you can feel the throat vibrate. Okay? And these are all gutturals. And then so the structure of the script is extremely well defined in terms of the parts of the body that produce those sounds. Okay, and I would say they're just basically how they're structured according to how the body can develop those sounds. Okay, and there are certain sounds which don't exist, for example, in our vocabulary. For example, some of the African sounds we cannot really reproduce very easily, or including some of the European sounds we cannot actually. So the k that we say, if I have to try to pronounce cut, okay, so I would say cut. Absolutely to patla English dila म्हणतात. So using my absolute Maharashtrian accent, but actually the English pronunciation of it is cut. Okay, so it's a sound between k and k. Okay, so these are two different sounds, and we don't produce those sounds, but those sounds could potentially be produced. I mean, if you see the k mukta, which is used in Hindi, which kind of comes a lot closer, although it's still not the same. Okay, so it's kind of even one step ahead of it. So it's like taking the microtones in a piano, basically, which you cannot produce ourselves. So, but there are some other sounds, African sounds, which you cannot produce. Which are like, for example, there is this sound which sounds like this, which we cannot produce. I mean, we can produce it. I mean, obviously, we have the same mouth structure, but we cannot write it down. Okay, we don't have written representations for it, and so on. But if barring some of these exceptions, we can produce any sound that human mouth can produce could more or less be represented in some way in the script. Okay, but the point is that this structure is also easy to memorize because it's according to the body parts. Okay, and so the typical, there has been findings, for example, in American studies which show that if you use alphabetical keyboards, that does not give any specific advantage as compared to a random keyboard. So they did studies. They had 4 different keyboards. One of them was a very optimized keyboard. One of them was a QWERTY keyboard that all of us are familiar with. One of them was an alphabetical keyboard. One of them was a random keyboard. Out of which, so the optimized keyboard obviously did the best. QWERTY did second best because it's reasonably well optimized. And the alphabetical and the random did equally badly. It was optimized according to how your hand moves and what is the letter frequency is like. So it's the Dvorak keyboard. It has a different layout from QWERTY. Okay, and so this was studied done in 1980s by Donald Norman. So the argument was that people did not use the alphabetical algorithm. So what that means is that so I am trying to type an N. People don't say, okay, I'm trying to type an N. So it has to be so LMNOP. So it has to be after the M and before the P. So LMNOP. Where is LMNOP? People don't use this algorithm. What they say is N. So they go about doing it. Okay. But when we do a similar study with Indian language and show them alphabetically laid out, or actually alphabetically wrong, laid out according to the Varnamala of the Devanagari system. So then people say no, or I have to type no. So Tatha doesn't know. They automatically say that. Where is Tatha? No. So actually they have forgotten the alphabetical sequence. They have forgotten the sequence of the Devanagari. But when they are searching for no, they say Tatha doesn't know. And they say this because it is so easy, because it's the same part of the body that is producing the sound. Okay, so they tend to. So what I'm saying is that such fundamental things we need to be able to look at when we are designing these things. So we should borrow from this, or rather, this is our storehouse, and if you want, we can use it. It can give us a benefit, basically.
That's very insightful, actually. So, as you mentioned about this keyboard thing, there are a lot of these concepts which are available in the market today, which have hit the masses, were probably conceived, say, 5, 10, 15 years back in IDC or other design schools. And this I got to know because Suneet Singh, who was my ex-boss, he was IDC student, right? So he mentioned about, so I'm asking on his behalf as well, that first of all, what are the challenges to stay ahead of this curve in terms of innovation or new inventions in the field of design? And secondly, how can we spot these brilliant ideas which were thought, say, 10 years back early on, so that we can bring them to the market soon?
Okay. So absolutely. I always say that, in fact, there are 2 ways of looking at it, and this is something that I touched upon earlier. We very often encourage students to work on projects that are far out, far ahead, or far beyond what is possible today, but it should be possible given the situation. Okay. Yeah, so this will be certainly an example of it, and there could be also many other. So I just want to give another example. You mentioned Suneet. So Suneet actually subsequently went and designed the Ola Act, right? So in a few years ago. What is interesting is Suneet passed out in 2004, if I remember, or 2005, I'm not sure. And in 2005 or 2006, I remember working on a project for taxi drivers. And many of the concepts that we actually, the project was a class project, so we just ran a 3-week class, and we conceptualized some products, which are very similar. And I fortunately happened to have the slides, and I can show it also even now, because after Ola came back, it makes a lot of sense to show that Ola and Uber. So many of the things that we talked about, Ola and Uber still don't do. Okay, but many of the other things that we talk about over there, they do. So there are a bunch of things that are out there that they don't do, and they could do possibly, or somebody else could do it and overtake them. So in a 3-week class, we can conceptualize something that can take 15 years for the industry to realize. And that is the capacity that we would like to develop in every designer. So by definition, or by effort, or by purpose, we will be ahead. Academia will be ahead of the industry. Because we are preparing people for the future. And so if this is happening, then it is not that the industry is failing, it is that the academics is becoming successful. Okay, there is a longer gestation period, and IT industry is one of the faster moving industries. Technologies change very fast, more things get developed very fast, and so on. Manufacturing industry has even longer gestation periods. So it is something that it's a question of gestation period. So industry has, the mouse was first showcased in Xerox Park research lab, so it's an industrial research lab, not even academic. In 1968, the project was ready. They started work in 1964. They showcased it in 1968. The first really popular commercial mouse, it took about 1984 before the Apple Macintosh was introduced, before it could become a viable product in the industry. So that's a 16-year gestation period. So that's typical of what we do now in research and what we do now in academics. 10 years, 15 years later becomes real.
But there's also a danger to this because like when we are giving this freedom to the students that you should think far out in the future, there's no like restriction as such as to how far, right? So it could be like 10 years, 20 years, or maybe 500 years down the line. So how do we like keep a tap on this so that we have some realistic goals or realistic expectations? And also to spot the idea early on so that it can at least reach the market in a relevant time. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so I can understand. This is more like an industry question rather than an academics question. So basically, I was saying, how do I reduce the gestation period and so on? So frankly, it is no. I don't know. I am not aware of any one or a specific set of methods to do that. So how do you nurture good ideas, you mean to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do I nurture? We actually had I said we don't engage much with the alumni, but we actually had an alumni meeting last December in IDC. And one of my students went ahead and founded a company, then sold his company, and then he came back. And then he was sort of saying, you're giving examples of he actually worked on projects which were about things like investments and ATM, like ideas like pay micropayments and so on. And he said, these ideas I conceptualized as a student, and at that time, my teachers were telling me to go and start up and do something about this. At that time, I did not pay attention and look at what is happening to Paytm today, or look at where all these micropayment companies are going today. I could have been one of those guys at that time. Okay, so there is always that regret. So the thing is that, and this is, I think this is a good place to be. If you could concretize, or if you could convert each and every idea that you could think about, then you're probably not thinking enough ideas. So the thing is that we have creative abilities. With those abilities, we are able to come up with hundreds of ideas. That does not mean each of those ideas could be materialized at some stage. Okay, but because we are able to come up with hundreds of ideas, there is a chance that some of them will stick, some of them we will be able to come up with materialize. But this is the same principle that comes from brainstorming in a smaller time scale. And now you come up with 100 ideas, and the reason why you don't critique any ideas at that time is because you want to generate more ideas. And so in a similar manner, now if you kind of expand that time frame, there has to be an opportunity for people to generate and be creative and come up with things that have not yet been conceptualized by anybody. And then many of those ideas actually probably might not be 100% practical now, but there might be one or two that might be. And so it's like asking, to tell before a film is made which film will become a hit film. It's very difficult to say.
So that actually reminded me of a quote by Vishnu Digambar Paluskar, where he mentions that I don't want to create Tansen. I would rather create Kansen.
Exactly.
Which actually means that you give some sort of an environment where design can flourish, and I believe IDC and other design schools are trying their level best to do this. So that's it from my side. Thanks, Anirudh, for being on the show. Thanks for giving us your time. Anything which you would like to share with our listeners?
No, I'm fine. Thank you very much for taking this initiative. I think it's a good idea. I hope you get thousands of hits.
Thank you.
And all the best for you.
Thank you. And that's it from my side on Epistemology of Design with Anirudha Joshi. Stay tuned for more GAN on Audio GAN next week. Till then, bye.